Hi guys, we are back with my painting demo and my painting project of this landscape, and I'd like to just show and tell a little bit about the kinds of paints that I use, the kinds of brushes. Let's turn the advertising around this way. Um so notice that I have titanium white, dark red, rubin red, or magenta for red. It's dark. It's a good mixing red. I'll tell you why later. Light yellow or bright yellow. It's a little on the lighter side of yellow. Black. And primary blue or a cyan blue. What I have as my tools is a spray bottle. It's very important to keep the paint fresh on the palette at all times so it doesn't dry out. I have a rag, all-purpose cotton rag made out of an old t-shirt. I have a nice butter knife for loading paint onto the palette. I have a kind of medium, smaller size palette knife, and I have other, but for this we'll just need this kind of palette knife. I have a variety of brushes that are sitting in a container with water. These are very basic brushes. I abuse them, I use them, and then once they become misshapen and not useful, I throw them away or recycle them to be sticks for art projects or for mixing. There are flat brushes that range from a bit bigger, number 12, and down. There are small brushes that are size like a 5 or a 4. And then I like this, just recently I've been using this brush. It's a round pointy brush, and they're all nylon, good nice nylon brushes. And this is an 8 size 8 pointy round brush. So this brush can do both details, and when it fans out like this, it can also place large brush strokes on large areas. I've been liking this brush recently. I want to show you what it would look like to load paint. I take a tub with paint and I keep the edges and the lid clean, and the paint is pristine. There's no traces of other paint. And I would take a small amount of paint like that onto a knife, and then I would place the paint onto the palette, close the lid on the jar, and thoroughly wipe the knife. And then I will go and do the next color. Note that I am loading light colors first because they are the easiest to dirty up with the darker colors. Look, there's not a dot of another color here. This is when I was studying art when I was younger. I had good teachers, and they explained to me why it is important to control my tools and my medium really well. Majority, more than 50% of success of my artwork is reliant on my ability to understand, control, use the supplies well. If I have trouble mixing, knowing how much water I need in the paint, if I have trouble knowing what colors I need and how to mix them, if I have trouble to apply paint with my tools onto canvas, if my paint dries out too quickly, if my brush stiffens, that means that I'm less effective at the task that I'm doing. So I always, just like teachers were really keen on telling me what's the good idea, and they were reinforcing that knowledge. You know, I've done rigorous hours of learning how to use the supplies, you know, training to know what the medium really well. Then I also love to reinforce and tell anyone who is listening, my students, colleagues, or people who are asking, or just in a video like this, it is indeed very important to know how to use these supplies with ease and with a lot of intimate knowledge about the paint, the brushes, the water, the oil. Anything is possible when the medium is easy to manage. I loaded the palette, and now I will mix a little bit, and I will show you what I usually do before I start painting. I decided that there will be an addition of some brighter green in this current painting. So let's take a look. How do I make green? Why don't I have green? What are these colors? These are primary colors: yellow, red, and blue, plus the black and the white. So these are all of the colors that cannot be mixed. They come as pure, unique colors. There is no way I can mix any one of these colors out of other colors. And all other colors in the world, all of the many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of mixtures, the orange, the green, the purple, and all of the different browns and all of the varieties of these colors could be mixed easily using just these 5 colors. It's possible to mix with the brush, but also it is quite nice to mix with a palette knife. I always keep the paint a little bit sprayed, keep the palette moist. These never dry out, no matter how many hours I'm working. If I keep, you know, every 20 minutes, keep a check, I got water sprayed on it. So I would like to show you a little bit about getting a nice green that I'm gonna be using here. I'm starting with some blue, and I'm starting with some yellow. And mixing with a palette knife or with a brush is this type of motion, just with the tip of the knife. This is called centrifuge, from center over. Center motion, rotating. This is, any mixing tool uses this method. It's the quickest to produce consistent color. So, you know, no need to move it from side to side. That's longer to produce consistent one color. Whip it around like that, and there it is, just this nice type of green right there. If it is too bright, I can just cut it a tiny bit with like a speck of black, and just tone it down a little bit. And the same could be done with red. Red is a complementary of a green, and you know, we're not getting too much into the color theory right now, but just some mixing. So let's see what happens when if I want, this is like a nice darker kind of bluish, kind of beautiful in the shadow green. And then I'll take half of that pile over to here and mix it with a little bit of white. And now I have another variation of this color, and maybe that's like quite a jump there. So there could be, you know, very many gradients between light green to dark green, or yes, we can see very large spectrum of colors with our eyes, and we can mix a very large spectrum of gradients of different kinds. Because of this mixing, because I know the mixing, because I practice and I investigate what it means to mix, I have success rate that's higher than if I didn't know my color theory or my mixing. Every little thing here in painting, or probably in other disciplines as well, you know, it's attention to detail, guys. Attention to detail, and investing energy in upgrading our skill set through dedicated practice at home. Let's paint, let's mix a lot, and let's be in the conversation about it. Now I have a nice variety going from lighter to medium to darker, and that's just this type of green, and you know, there could be hundreds of them, and I will surely be going through many different varieties of every possible mixture that I need for the painting. Let's take a look at what's been done with the painting since we've last seen it. We talked about getting into more detail, making things a little more complex. Notice that even the next move for this tree, it's kind of general and flat. Here the colors are kind of decided, but there's no texture, no information, no detail on it. But there is already initiative taken to start detailing, showing the bark of the tree. There's going to be a lot of that happening in my spare time, shaping these trees into tree-like things. There, I've taken this purple gray and more bright and colder kind of emerald looking green that we just mixed on the palette. I've taken it into the background. I started to figure out what else will appear in the background. These far back elements, trees, and the green is coming in quite a bit. We looked at how I construct the edge of this whole dark form of the tree foliage. It's got a very particular dynamic looking contrasty shape against the background. And then the trees themselves are gaining more and more particular information. They're getting branches, they're getting light and dark, and even their form is changing slightly. I am really digging in at this point. I want to show you the overall look of the painting. There it is. Let's take a look at a little bit of painting action that's happening. So I would like to, once again, I'm taking each broad and not as detailed area, and I am going back into it for more in-depth information. And I'm wanting to see this new green come in, so I will spend a good amount of time building that green into the existing less saturated areas. I will take a day or two to continue working on the painting. It needs a lot of labor. Not a lot, you know, just a couple of good, healthy, solid days of painting. And then I will return and show you the finalizing steps. So probably maybe 10 more hours will be put into this. Some wonderful amounts of detail and particular information will happen everywhere. We are looking at a few hours later, where I am starting to populate with more detail. Notice that smaller elements are coming into the scene. Notice that areas that were kind of flat before, they are now gonna get these wonderful clusters of information, such as younger trees in the foreground, and in the background their foliage. There's really quite a bit going on. So this is now taking detail, taking an area and crafting our details in. Let's demonstrate a little bit about how I approach it. I'm gonna show you how these little tall grass or little bushes are starting to appear under the trees within the shadow. I'm gonna show you that right now. So quite a bit of mixing is going on, and I'm getting a nice light green to get started. Since this is a darker area, so addition of light is creating quite a stark of a contrast. I am painting, in the strategy I'm taking is I'm kind of emerging with smaller light details out of existing area of light, going from simple to a bit more complex. And then right across, across the shadow, I am crafting these impressions of clusters of leaves. And here really experience is really helpful here. Less is more again. I'm using a fairly small brush because it gives me the ability to draw smaller details, to paint smaller brush strokes into the existing large area that's already figured out or prepared or set underneath. So notice that I am making clusters that are slightly larger than more medium-sized, and then even really tiny. That's a satisfying amount of dynamic detail information where we can see a large, medium-sized and small elements interact in one area. It makes for dynamic look. So I just placed some light areas, and then the strategy for further back, like that's maybe many feet away, that next tree from this one. So I need to make sure that the information I'm placing there is not similar to this, to the foreground. Smaller, more faded, less developed clusters of leaves will be visible far back. And I will continue improving on this until it looks really good, and I could say, oh, I think this is really nicely visually balanced and I'm liking it. Right now I'm just starting the conversation with myself about whether I like this or not. What else? I am looking a lot at my reference, and I'm looking a lot at my favorite artists' paintings, classical artists, and I am examining, oh, how did they do this task? Oh, how did they go about painting light and dark, greenery information in the midground, in the background, in the foreground? What, you know, so let's go and brush up on that. You will see the clues are all there. And so I am really digging in and putting in hours, and it's exciting. And like the painting is really surely, slowly but surely, it's moving towards its completion. So I placed a bit of lighter areas. Now I'm going to take the shadow component of that, the dark green, and I'm gonna again place a little bit of that shadow under these clusters to increase the three-dimensional feel, to give this area, to give each object some more form. You see, it starts to pop forward a little more. And maybe if I place too much of the darker shadow, then I can break it up with another mid-tone. And then there will be even lighter highlights going over top of that. Just in a couple of areas, there'll be really, really, really glittery and shiny leaves appearing. So that's how so I will be taking literally almost everything to have satisfying detail. The painting is really coming along, and it's transformed quite a bit from the beginning. This is still quite general. We are seeing a shape of fairly dark green here, and I'm bringing more information to all of the surfaces now. So another version of green is also gonna come in here. Let's say the light is coming from over there, the top, middle, top right of the scene. So the light will travel onto the top right of each cluster of leaves, and start appearing there. And that's gonna be very subtle, but very effective as a three-dimensional component. It is possible to see a form. Three-dimensional properties are being shown. I often, when I start an area, I often draw with a small brush. It's like a drawing tool. I am getting into the area. I'm trying to carefully get a feel for what I'm about to do, to set some lines, some started areas. And then it is also possible to go into a larger brush or a palette knife as a tool for painting, then to resolve a whole bunch of these areas. Once I have a good understanding about what I'm doing, how I'm gonna go about it, so it's good to be careful. So lots of this action is happening. I'm thinking maybe this green is too vibrant, but I will let it dry a little bit and see what it looks like in a little while as I continue working on the light and dark within the foliage. Here we go. More green and variations within the top area of the painting have been added a few hours later. I'm getting into every object, like these foreground trees on the right are getting worked, and I'm about to do something, you know, add the grooves and the bark of the tree and all the detail, and you just spend some time on the background trees as well. Let's have a look at what else I'm doing. I got a couple of lighter greens mixed up here, and my vision was that there will be bushes and young growth, shoots of small trees, greenery, and it will come as later as a detail, and it is starting to come in several places. There's still a lot of it to bring in, and so I've waited a little bit until I would bring some to this area. Notice that the far back elements are smaller in size, and then the information a bit closer is greater in size. This is helping to set up the perspective and feel of three-dimensional space and depth. So these very bushes, these little plants underneath the foreground trees, they will be bigger, and their leaves will be greater in size. So I have a really nice picture to look at for the close-up elements, and pretty much we're going ahead, and I am setting these shapes up. I have experience in creating a painting. I have a pretty good idea about what I want to see at the end, and I understand the methods that will be required, you know, the method of work that I need to employ. So drawing out of shapes roughly, looking at the leaves within a photo reference, or it could be if I'm painting from live subject or a still life, or if I'm outside painting, I'd be examining the shapes of the objects, and I would be starting to, and I will start to create and draw them out and find a likely placement, and that's done roughly. And now I will spend a good amount of time to build on these leafy elements into the foreground to appear below the trees, and then there will be, I will show you what that looks like when I'm a little bit ahead. And so it goes that I am using a couple of varieties of green right now to just get the whole cluster of close-up detail going. And at this point, it's not, you know, I just want the whole area set up. I want to design all of the leaves and how they flow together, and they are not too light right now, so that I have lots of room for highlights later on. I am wanting a variety of small, mid-size larger branches with leaves on them, and so it goes. So this is where we are really investing the labor, and where the studying happens here. It's good to review how did other artists succeed, what can we learn from them. Let's just take lead from what's already known, and those who are doing this, we can learn from me, we can learn from each other, learn from great artists who live today and who lived in the past. Lots of new additions to the foreground. There's I'm trying to see how all of this close-up detail of the bushes and the grass, or indication that there's some grass, how all of this is gonna develop. I am thinking that this is maybe too small of leaves, clusters. Maybe needs to be a little bigger like this, but there's lots going on. I am thinking about what would be my final choice of color within the trees. Still not so sure about that. And I want to show you guys how drastic would be the addition of a highlight in a painting. And we'll use a palette knife, and the aim is gonna be this area. That's where all the sunlight is above somewhere, but it's coming through the trees and through the foliage over there a lot. So I'm gonna get it started, and this is gonna be a very small amount of yellow with a lot of white, and the paint is sitting on the back of the palette knife, and take a look at what's happening here. So I want to really kick this off for myself. I want to know that a lot of light is gonna start coming in, and now I'm gonna need to really figure out where all the highlights are gonna be, how they're gonna interact. If they're gonna be, I'm gonna try to put them all in mass. There might be quite an addition of highlight in many places. That would include the see-through areas here, like a whole bunch there, and then probably a whole lot of it will come into these the areas lit by the sun within the grass. And I can even put nearly a pure white blob of paint in the middle of that, so that it really seems really shiny, like really contrasty. I will be spending quite a bit of time now to adjust all of this, and I'll show you a little more towards the end. So yeah, probably the highlights are gonna hit some of these areas as well. There's really a lot to think about and start putting in. Well, let's take a look at the entire picture of what it looks like as it's progressing. There are a lot of nice areas about it already, and then there are areas that I still don't like. I'm really trying to see how to work these trees in the background. They're not all working yet for me. I might change their color and spend a little bit of time working on them. Yay! I am getting into the tree trunks in the midground and in the back with some palette knife. So I'm mixing colors with the palette knife, and then I am swiftly kind of setting up this texture, the roughness, and I'm touching the canvas lightly. It's not necessary to work the paint into the surface hard, like so. All of this is nice and gentle action. And I like to go back into some of the palette knife strokes and break them up to try to create more painterly surface. Like, do you see how that little bit just transformed into like a lot more subtle, a lot more satisfying kind of a abstract surface, and it's quite suitable for being a tree bark, and it's a lot of fun to use that. Still like the orange to be in there. And then I'm looking forward to later to get even more like these highlights, like right off on the edge of the object, even more highlighted. And this is really careful balancing, and yeah, really careful balancing and lots of care and careful painting. Lots of smaller features are getting making their way into the painting, and also adjusting between different properties. Like the background has gotten a lot lighter, all the foliage has gotten a lot more connected. The edges of all of the features are getting their final, more detailed look. Let's look at one of the methods I'm employing here. Oh yeah, lots of light areas came in over there, over there, over there, and I worked on some areas with the palette knife to get these really visible and chunky kind of brush strokes. However, they are looking a little separate from the shadow area. So it's kind of like this is a little bit separate and has its own feel, and then that's not connecting. So here's the maybe a method that I'm using to connect it. It's I'm cutting the acrylic down with water quite a bit, and I am getting it to be more like ink or even watercolor. And then I am creating elongated brush strokes that kind of fade. So I'm fading this darker green with the kind of really light kind of touch, feather touch. And what it does, it marries this light area with the darker area quite effectively. Do you see? So let's just look at a couple more of these. So I'm like taking that darkish green that's diluted, and I'm ever so slightly moving. And that kind of looks like grass too when I do that. So it doesn't have to be everywhere. It's just to merge light and dark areas. And there's really is once you have the experience, then like the far back strokes will be much smaller and maybe more faded, and I'll fade them even more afterwards, so that the whatever is done in the foreground stays visible. Like there's the shape of grass patch, or like, you know, there's a feel of grass there. And far back it reads as a general area with less detail in it. So lots of nice new stuff has been added. What else am I adding? These the foreground leaves, and yeah, this painting is maybe another 10 hours, maybe 15 hours away from being done. Starting to look like it, like the nature that I'm trying to paint.